Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity. It's Mohammed Ibrahim from Melbourne. Um, I want to thank Maggie and Joe and the rest of the team who organized this event. And I want to welcome you all wherever you are in the world. I hope you're all well and safe. Now, this presentation is about the idea about mobile money and financial inclusion, and I really want to um, focus on the financial inclusion more than the mobile money and the cryptos, which I will talk about. So yesterday we discussed a lot of ideas about the CBDCs, but today, as a wrap up for the whole event, I really want to take advantage of that summarizing method of all the ideas I had over the last 2 days. And my focus is really where is the future of money, where are we going with money, and what is the future of money in the era of the CBDCs and central bank digital currencies. It's a new phenomena where I guess we will hear more about this as time goes, because that's where things are going. I know many of you wrote to me yesterday and there were questions about cryptos and the idea about Bitcoin, what have you. It's all exciting, it's all good, but really, with the limited time we have, I will mention some ideas about cryptos and so on. But my emphasis is mobile money and what it can do about financial inclusion, but also because it's a kind of a wrap up for the whole 2 day event. I'm asked to talk about the idea of CBDCs and where we're going with this, and what's the future of money. Now, what I really want to share with you is a couple of, first of all, as an introduction, just to remind ourselves a brief history of money, I guess. And if you look at my first slide, I showed what money used to look like. For example, the idea of stones, or in the Papua New Guinea where they use biggest tooth and the kina and what have you, and shells. But then very quickly we moved on as societies get more organized and governments introduce the money and so on. And we all know about the M0s, M1, M2, M3, and what have you. This is not really my area that I want to focus on, but I just want to keep things in perspective. And then we hear about the MMTs and so on, and the CBDs now, which we will focus on, of course, and cryptos. But here's my kind of, in a friendly, joking way, to say the way things are moving so fast, we might end up going back to the shells and the rocks at some stage. But that is really for another reason. I want to mention that. Now, very brief, really brief for history of money. We know where we came from and all the way to where we are now, where everything is digitalized, and we're talking about money becoming even not government issue, but even private sectors can produce, and we hear about all these digital currencies and so on. But the evolution of mobile money, just as a part of the wrap up, a lot of things happened over the last few years. In fact, 2019 and 2020 alone, if you look at the reports from GSMA, dramatic change. Very high uptake of mobile money, especially in the developing countries. And as an African or Somali from that part of the world, I'm quite happy to mention M-Pesa, which is leading, and for the first time we have technology coming from developed countries from developing countries to developed country, which is good. Why not? We now have circulation of ideas, and instead of worrying about brain drain, now we have a brain circulation, and some ideas can come up from developing countries and so on. So hence my excitement about mobile money and the role it's playing. But while we're here, though, what I really want to mention is one of the reasons money is going to digital is the cost associated with money, actually producing money and making money, and it's not cheap. So I just want to share this with you as an example. In Australia, the 2020 budget for just producing money, and in Australia we have the Federal Reserve and the dealing that deals with the notes and whatever, and then we have the mint, that deals with the coins and so on. But putting them all together, $877 million were spent just to produce the currency itself. So, for example, to produce a $1, $2 note costs about 7.7 cents just to produce it. So money, it's costly, it's expensive to produce. It's a lot of effort goes in securing it, what have you. And now in the COVID-19 era, people are even saying it's dangerous health-wise. So a lot of negative issues related to money, as we know, notes and coins. So that's another reason for the move, that why money is going to become digital. And moving forward, what I really want to talk about is to show that mobile money and financial inclusion, there is a link, and this is an area that I'm actually doing formal research, and hopefully by the end of the next year I'll produce something that hopefully will inform policymakers and central banks and so on. That's my contribution to this field. And more importantly, though, it's also a UN Sustainable Development goals, in fact. Out of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, 8 of them deal with financial inclusion and how money can help. And one example I want to pick on is specifically about Somalia, my country, and how much money is already digital. In fact, I can even say, although don't quote me on this, I have no reference for this, but we almost on digital money, we even dollarized, which is another story that maybe in another session I'll talk about that. But if we look at mobile money itself, it has gone through different versions where we have what I used to call the mobile money 1.0, where was how it started, mobile money in a national way, basically like being used in Somalia. Then it became regional, meaning instead of just being used in one country, it started moving across the whole country. So it became a national, and then it became a regional. So that means you can transfer money using mobile money from Somalia to Kenya and so on. And now we have the cross-border payments where it's almost global. So I call that 2.5, mobile money 2.5, but dramatic change, and we really need to pay attention, especially policymakers and governments. Now, if we continue, there's a lot of high volume of money goes through mobile money, and that's the future. But if we look at seriously, is the future of money digital? Personally, my personal take on this is yes, it is. There's no going back. You can challenge me, you can come up with another idea, but I think the trend is irreversible. We're moving towards digital, and money, as we know, is no longer coins and notes. But by the way, it was always digital. For some reason, people want to ignore that. And as an anecdote, I want to remind people way back, I was in Beijing for a conference, and my Chinese friend was telling me, what's the big deal about this digital financial services? Money was always digital. It didn't click at that time, but now looking back, I can see where he was going with that, and more of that in a minute. Now, if we also look at all the organizations involved in this area, there is the cashless the groups, people pushing towards cashless society, this Alliance of Financial Inclusion, and all these other groups who are global, and they're all looking at this particular case. So it's very timely, and we need to think about this. Now, there are a lot of figures floating around, and they're all more or less correct, but I just want to highlight the need for also precision here, where when we talk about mobile money, who's using it and by how much. The numbers vary, but really what matters to me, it's not the figures themselves. We can quote whichever number we want, but what to me globally, what's important is we're moving forward. In other words, this is something that we can be sure that it's the way forward. In other words, it doesn't really matter whether you look at one country or region or globally. That's where things are moving. So if you look at this, all these groups who are looking at this, they all agree on one thing, that yes, we are digital and that's where we're going. Now, what is new? What is now making a headline is the last report from GSMA 2021, only released a few weeks ago, confirms this again. And as you can see, it's really high rise. It's not even debatable. This trend is not something we can argue about. But what is important though, and this is the area that I really want to focus on as we now move to the thinking about this idea about the central bank digital currencies. All along, we knew central banks deal with other banks. So there was no direct link between central bank and individual as a citizen. So far, so good. That's what we were taught at schools and universities, and that was what was happening. But lately, there's a new idea. We're hearing all about this central bank digital currency. So all of a sudden, what we knew before, like mobile money at the lower scale, now we're hearing even the central banks getting involved. So the question for me is why? What has prompted these central banks were around all along? They're not entity that's new. What's the uptake? What has happened? And here's my personal take on this. I think what happened is the central banks were asleep on the wheel. Basically, they were not aware. Again, this is personal idea. What was happening was there were a lot of other technical giants, people like the Facebooks and the Googles, who were also making their own money and allowing people to use that for what was classic definition of money, like units of exchange and unit of account and all those things. So all of a sudden, the banks realized, well, there's now a new kid in the block. There are other people who can also make money, and people are moving now, staying away from this magic word about Bitcoin or whatever. But really, that's only one of thousands of other cryptocurrencies, and people trade on them or what have you. So really, it's catching up. The central banks felt threatened. They felt that they were out of the loop, and the citizens were voting with their feet and using other currencies and so on. Now, the classic definition of money that we did in schools, there were three definitions, and I don't want to repeat them all, but lately there was a fourth one. People were saying maybe the fourth definition is controlled by the government. In other words, governments want to control us citizens through money as well. And CBDCs, more than anything, will strengthen that. They will actually make that even better for governments. They will actually have more control over citizens if that happens and we end up moving to CBDCs. Now, the question is then, and it's a digital money, so whose digital money? Is it really governments who will produce this, or is it the private sector? Now, the evidence there, these are, again, reports from the Citigroup. I want to acknowledge them, and you can read more about this. I think it was released last month, and they show countries who are already producing CBDCs, and Bahamas is the top in the group, and Cambodia and so on, which is interesting. Again, we're seeing smaller countries, developing countries, moving faster than the more established, powerful economies like the US, Japan, and so on, and the European Union. Now, that to me is an exciting development, but that is not the full story. What is more important that we have to realize is those smaller countries, although they're doing the right thing, like the Bahamas and the Caribbean Central Bank moving forward, and Cambodia trying, developing this and what have you. But the big fish, the people who were always exploiting, and I'm sorry using that word, the financial sector, are also jumping in. So we're hearing about MasterCard making deal with the Bahamas and so on. And lately I was also reading that they even approached China and what have you. So I just want to warn people, I want to really, this concept or this revolution or this move towards CBDCs and digital currencies, I want it to be liberating. I want people for the first time to be free from the greed of banks and institutions that really, in a way, even it's more than exploitation, it's almost abusive. And people to become free and have money, and if they work hard to have their money and use the way they want, instead of going through a third party, and ultimately even getting to the authorities who are legally allowed to manage this. So yes, central banks, I'm with you, and I want central banks to manage this. Yes, I'm happy with governments to regulate and so on, but other banks, I don't really see their room. And I'm on the record for a while saying banks, that their time has come and they should move on. Now, if we now look at the concept of the moving from local to global, and mobile money now going across boundaries and crossing through countries, again, CBDs will help this. And this is where I really want to highlight that we shouldn't look at CBDCs as a negative, but in fact, it's positive and it will help, because there'll be more regulations, and now we will know the central banks working together, because at the end of the day, what we really want is some sort of stability, financial stability, security, minimum crime, less abuse in the financial systems. And the way to achieve so far was with the SWIFT group and the banks working together through their correspondence bank arrangements and so on. But we also know there were a lot of nefarious activities going on in the financial sector where people were abusing the system to do things. So when the cryptos came on board and Bitcoin was leading, there was a lot of negative issues. Even personally myself, I early on was interested in this, but I backed off. Maybe I should have stayed. Now I could have made money out of my Bitcoins. But because of that link, a lot of people left the Bitcoin area. But now it seems all the major players, even governments, are coming back and saying, well, look, maybe there's a future for this and it can complement the financial systems and so on. Now, if we look at where we at today, now focusing a bit more on cryptos and CBDCs, first of all, I want to be on the record and I want to say they're here to stay. They're not going to go away now. I want to thank and use John Keefe as a reference here, who is constantly keeping us up to date, almost a daily bulletin on where things are. So you can follow him on LinkedIn, and he's from the IMF group. And there are a lot of people doing research on this. So here, this is the most authoritative I found, where daily you can get where things are and so on. I also want to mention for all of the friends in academia, it's not really, it's not something that just came up overnight. Even Bitcoin, although a lot of people were thinking about it in a negative way, there's a lot of history. So if you quickly look at this chart, over 40 years, there's a lot of science went into this to get to Bitcoin. So it was not something that Satoshi came up and wrote his paper and it just came up overnight. No, there is serious computing behind this. So what we really need, and the bit that's probably missing in the block, is the regulation and where governments come in. Maybe very light footprint in that case, but that's probably the missing link. So what I really want to say is, yes, cryptos can help, and the central bank digital currencies can help financial inclusion, and that's where I'm excited about. And even if the banks produce different ones, central banks, multiple CBDCs, no harm. That's okay. We can make them integrate as well. But what I want to quickly mention is it's not easy and it's not for everyone. One reason there is a delay in the uptake and the numbers are not increasing fast enough is there is a financial literacy. In other words, we really need to understand a lot of things before we can get into cryptos and CBDCs, because there's a bit of a computing involved, bit of a understanding needed how to set up your e-wallet and so on. So that gap will delay perhaps more in the developing countries. So when we talk about financial inclusions, that could be a negative issue that I'm just highlighting. We need to think about how do we make sure that digital financial services available. So in other words, first of all, if you have no Wi-Fi and you're in an area where there's no internet, then you're already out. You cannot really do a lot of things, although China is coming up with a solution even to overcome that. So that means people who are digitally disadvantaged can still be part of the revolution in the CBDCs and cryptos. Now, if we look at what else was happening elsewhere, there's a lot of things about a lot of studies, and this charts basically show the money flower, basically the idea that says all along people knew they were thinking about uh, where will it fit in. It wasn't that it wasn't going to happen. We all knew CBDCs are coming and they were on the way and now they're here to stay. It was really where will they fit in. So I'm just sharing this with you and I will encourage you to look at this. And the building blocks are already there, but it's just a matter of finding out which way to go and where to put them in and which way they should move forward. So there was, if any, there was a discussion about the flow. How do we go about this, or how do central banks go about this? Should it be wholesale first or retail? And all of that are now happening. In other words, they're starting as a wholesale, where initially it's between the central banks and the other banks and so on, and institutions, and ultimately it will reach us as well, the individuals and citizens in the retail level. So it's been tested in China successfully and it's working. Other countries are thinking about it. Even 2 days ago, I was reading Bank of England, although they're not officially saying it, but they're out there and they're doing it and recruiting people to do it. And I wrote this in other areas, and if you're interested, you can read about them. Australia is looking at it. The US, they have their own other idea about the digital dollar. And I just want to mention, in terms of financial inclusion, as of November last year, there were a lot of people in the States who, through the stimulus package, although the government was trying to provide money and give to people to help with the COVID-19, who couldn't get that money because they were unbanked. Now, this might come as a surprise that a country like the US, how can there be people who are unbanked? But the reality is there are people who are unbanked and they're not within the financial services, so they have to go through other mechanisms to get money. Now, state of play, where are we today? Where are things? Now, this is very crowded slide, but really I'll let you read on your own leisure time and read, but I just want to mention a couple of things. One is the big companies and the big gurus, they were already digital. On the other hand, governments were also already going digital. And if you can see the example of the Chinese RMB, they were almost on the fourth level, I think, and that will only grow. And then there's also this concept about the data and people being scared of CBDCs and whether that would mean more data going to the government. I will say something about that in a minute. And also there is this concept about, again, as you can see, the CEO of MasterCard talking about how many people around the world without access to financial services, and there were 44 million unbanked or underbanked in the US. Now, this is very different from where I am in Australia, where almost everyone has a bank account. So between these four concepts, I want to move on and mention something else that will link all of this. The state of play where we are right now, again, two quotes, one from China and one from the US. If you put this one next to each other, it gives you a picture of where things are. Now, why is this important, and why am I putting those two quotes next to each other? Because the principle is the same. We're not arguing about the direction where we are going. We're really only about the speed, how quickly we want to move. So Australia, EU, and US, we're taking more time. We're thinking about it. On the other hand, other countries are moving on and they're just doing it. And of course, they spend their thinking on this for a long time. So my take on this is, and I'm now want to acknowledge Richard Turner, who produced the first book, I think, on digital currency. And I'm referring, this quote's actually from his book. So I don't know what's the best way to give him acknowledgement, but there he is. And I don't want to advertise. I'm not allowed to advertise on this presentation, but I'm just leaving there for you to get more information from that. Now, well, what these two quotes from Jeremy Powell, the U.S. Federal Reserve, and Mo Jianhun of the Chinese Central Bank's Digital Currency Research Institute, basically summarizes where things are. Focus on anonymity and privacy, and the US saying, look, we really, it's not acceptable for us, like what China is doing, but it might not be attractive in the US and so on. But the general direction, the way things are moving, those nobody's saying we shouldn't do it. It's just how do we do it? So we need to keep that in mind. If we move on, and I want to just quickly mention to continue the state of play, what is the major issues? There are few real issues, but I just want to mention two of them. One is this concept about governments becoming more powerful and getting more of our data. Now the news that we all know is government was always getting data. The difference is if we allow the government to produce CBDCs and we use that, at least we might have a better chance that through legislation and people we elect in governments, more control. This is my personal take again. But the way things are now, whether you like it or not, the banks are getting all your data. And with the open banking facility, they can also share among themselves. But guess what? Even worse, others are also getting your data. So we might be better off at least working on our governments, even if it means moving to government 2.0 and getting better legislations and better representatives who can protect us rather than the status quo, which to me, I think we are really in a worse position. But that's my personal view. If we continue, the other issue is about this whole idea about social engineering. And what does it mean? What it really means is technology allows. Now, governments enable the production of money, whether it's through the Reserve Bank or central banks. Money comes through that, through the commercial banks, and then to us. And once we get the money, it's anonymous. Nobody knows whether I'm buying a book or whether I'm buying coffee or whether I'm going somewhere else or people playing in casinos or whatever. That means there's no link. Once the money is issued and you have the money, the governments cannot track you. That's today. With CBDCs, there's a possibility that, yes, the government might know what you do with your money. Personally, I had a short time in government and I have a lot of trust, or maybe I should say a lot of respect for governments. And I think rules should stay. Rule of law is needed, otherwise things will go chaos. So yes, we might lose some privacy, but we don't have it now either. So take your pick. So to me, I would rather have governments controlling this, and that's where personally I stand. Now, and if governments have more focused goals, why not? If we can say more money should be spent on real estate or on education, and the government can have a say in this. At the end of the day, we allow the governments to regulate the money and produce the money. And then I don't really see anything wrong with also governments. We are elected governments who represent us. There's nothing wrong to achieve the goals if they can have a say in this. So instead of banks giving money to people building casinos and God knows what else, if the government says really we want money to go into education or solar or sustainable goals, if they can also have some controls, why not? So that's my personal position. Now, if we quickly continue, what next then? If we, as a wrap up of the conference, if the idea is, yes, we have seen digital money, we have seen mobile money, and if unregulated, we know what happens, like a place like in Somalia, where if the government is not strong enough, and there are a few other people who can actually print money, although some people don't understand this concept, if there's no regulation, and telcos or some other entities can produce mobile money, yes, then things can get out of hand. And we have some evidence of that where it can even lead to unintended consequences. On the other hand, if you have governments who can legislate, but the banks can do the risking, that's also another risk. So we need to find the balance somewhere where we can say enough rules without not overburdening the citizens. So that's really where we need to fine tune things and so on. Now, if I want to continue here, and then as a technologist, I want to think ahead and say, what next now? We've seen the digital currencies, we have seen the Bitcoins, we have seen all these things. What comes next? I guess a lot of other possibilities. Already where we are in the US and Australia and what have you, there are a lot of projects going on in the US. We heard about the digital dollar project. coming soon kind of thing. Fed now, I always call Fed when. But China, DCEP, they seem to use different acronym, but the idea is digital currency, electronic payment. It's already here. It's happening. Now, I'm a bit excited about this because next year, if there's no COVID, I want to go to the 2022 Winter Olympics, and I really want to see my card and use in China the digital currency. I can't really wait for that. I hope we can travel by then. But seriously, though, really, this idea need is a bit more collaboration, and governments should really talk about this and collaborate and do something. But to conclude, yes, there's a change going on. Money is moving to digital. Cryptos are here. Bitcoin is here. Not only Bitcoin, but even if you look at this picture, Doji coin, and they even had their Doji Day. But I'm not advertising this because I'm not allowed, but I want to mention this because of the fact that there were Australians involved, the software engineers developed this. And I even bought some of this myself, but not really for investment, but I just want to stay in the game for research purpose. But they're here to stay. And why? Because it's kind of a leapfrog. We are really jumping from one era to another. And I want to mention Orin Harari here. And if you're not aware of his work, I would encourage you to read some of his work. But his quote here, he says, the electric light did not come from the continuous improvement of candles. We don't want to say, look, we use shells, we use the M0, M1, M2 methods, MMTs, now we have coins and nodes. But no, we can jump. We can say, look, basically from hard, tangible stuff to digital. And that's what's happening. So I'm a bit excited about this, and I really want to leave there. So if there are comments, questions, please let's continue the discussion. And what I really want to mention very quickly is I didn't just come up with all these ideas, but there's standing on the shoulders of giants from 4 well-known universities in my hometown here, Melbourne, and comments, feedback, all welcome. I want to thank the people who taught me all these ideas and the people who are working with me. I want to thank you all. Jason Ball, Swinburne, and lots of other people who really taught me all these ideas and brought me to this level. I want to acknowledge them all. Cecilia Riddle, ACU, Katzen at Monash, Cheryl Saunders at Melbourne Uni, Shahram in Deakin. There are a lot of people who got me to where I am, and I want to acknowledge them all. I want to thank you. Feedback, comments, critique, anything, all welcome. It's Mohammed. I want to leave you there. It's been an interesting 2 days. Talk soon. In the meantime, stay safe. Thank you.